All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 67. Turn up my sound a little bit. There we go. Welcome to day 67 of our C# programming class. All right, now I did send out 2 emails today, and I want to explain what I did, why I did, etc., but I'm going to do them in the order in which I sent them out. So, as it says, the first thing we're going to do today is to, again, go over chapter 20, and I'm going to hit the high points. All right. And after we do that, I'm going to go over the final project in some detail. All right. And I'm going to show you how to build. We're basically going to build the classes together, and then we're going to build the database off of the class. All right. Now, it says in here, and it's true, as of right now, Mr. Tab, so that students finish. So if they've got any late work, they can do that. Notice that late work is due by 2 weeks from tonight at midnight. I don't want it after that. All right. Your end of semester project, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, is also due 2 weeks from now. And finally, your electronic portfolio will be due by midnight 2 weeks from tomorrow. All right. I mentioned this yesterday, and I'm going to say it again today, and that is, well, you know that the chapter 19 homework was already due, but for chapter 20, do the written test. Just those homeworks that we did in class. And some of you have already turned those in. When people have asked, yes, you're supposed to do the same worksheet, either do it 3 times or put each query underneath each problem. Do it as SQL, do it as LINQ with expression syntax, do it as LINQ with method syntax. If you have questions on that, it's your responsibility to let me know, to ask. All right. And again, your completed electronic portfolios are due 2 weeks by midnight, as is any late work, and your completed final project is due 2 weeks from tomorrow. All right. I mean, 2 weeks from Friday is it, and I have to have grades in on that day. All right. So now what I did was, after I sent that stuff out to you, I sent out another email. And as you can see, all right, what I did was I gave you a zipped folder, and in that zip folder is the programs for chapter 20 in the book. All right, the chapter 20 program that was at the end of the chapter, and the 2 extra exercises programs. We'll look at those as we get there. Look at the note, please. These are right from Muroc. I have not modified them. All right, they should all work, but you should have to follow the instructions as they're shown in the book as well. All right, so with that said, I'm going to jump back into chapter 20. Now, when they talk in here about how to do this first part of the chapter, there's many pages that were in here, okay? Not all of them, but most of the pages that were in there are dealing with doing a database first, which we had problems with yesterday. But you know what? We don't have to do that. We're going, in fact, we're going to do a database first later. In fact, we're doing a code first. Let me say this again. There's 2 ways of doing this. All right. And they are, get rid of that. So hold on a second. You can either, when you do this stuff, you can do it code first, or you can do it database first. Now, where I had the problem yesterday was with this one. With database first, you take an existing database, you run some commands on it, which we'll quickly go over in just a minute, and you end up creating your classes. So you start with a database, you run some commands, and then the associated entity classes are, that's just Now that was the one we tried yesterday, and admittedly, I had nothing but problems with it. But we're not doing that. We're doing this one. And why are we doing the code first? Well, I mentioned this yesterday, but I want to say it again. All right. And that is that, first of all, this is the recommended way of doing things from now on. All right. What is going to be coming out shortly is Entity Framework 8. It'll come out after the semester. So those of you who are in the class in summer, the AWD1100, whether you take it in summer or whether or not you take it next fall or spring, you'll probably be using Entity Framework 8. We're using 7. And one of the things they're doing with 7 is they're basically starting to drop support for this. They don't want people to do it like this anymore. They want them to do it like this. So here the difference is we start with our entity classes. We again come in and we run some commands. All right. And then after we run those commands, then the associated database is created for you. So that is the difference between them in a nutshell. All right, so we are going to be doing the code first in just a little bit, but just so you see that, that is the biggest difference between them. It's kind of like with one of them is sort of flipped with the other one, all right, or however you want to refer to that. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but not real much. All right, we will talk a little bit about the stuff in here and a little bit about link. All right, but most of the stuff that we'll talk about in here is using EF Core to modify the database, how to bind the controls. We're not going to really talk much of any of about the data access class, but we'll look at everything that's in there. And we'll quickly look at the customer maintenance app that's at the end of the chapter. All right. After we do that, regardless of what time it is, then we're going to go in and we're going to start talking about the project. I'm going to go over every facet of the project. And after I go over every facet of the project, then we're going to start to build the project together. That's the plan today. If we're done by 10 or 10:30, that's fine. Not a problem. All right. So we talked about this yesterday, that entity framework is what's called an ORM. It's an object relational mapper. Look at it as though it's a translator, that it is able to take your C# statements that you put in and send them to the database and put them in a way that the database can understand it. And then it can take the data that comes back from the database, translate it into a way that your C# understand it. All right, the way it does this, as it says, is it does this through this DB context class. The reason that that DB context class is important is what happens is your entity classes, and if you don't know what those mean, this you're going to see this today, but your entity classes actually manipulate the DB context class, which has got a copy of your database. When you do the save changes, when you call the save changes method, it says now copy everything that's in my DB context, copy it over to the database. And that's when changes are actually made. All right. So they mentioned there when you use EF Core, you use queries to retrieve data from a database. You're going to have to do that. All right. And again, we'll talk about that as we go on. Then, as it says, EF Core translates the query into a form the database understands. So once again, it is like a translator. All right. And they mentioned you can work with EF Core in 2 different ways. You're expected, and the main reason that you're expected to use LINQ is twofold. First of all, we spend quite a bit of time doing LINQ queries, both expression-based LINQ queries and method-based LINQ queries. I would recommend for this assignment that you're doing, you use method-based LINQ queries. If you don't agree and you're like, no, I want to use expression-based, then go for it. It's not a problem. But we're not using straight SQL queries here. All right. Now, this is what I mentioned before. EF Core has abstracted the details of the data source. So as it says, you're actually querying. So when you are doing selects, or when you're doing inserts, or when you're doing updates, or when you're doing deletes, you're working with the context, which again is for lack of better words, it's kind of a copy of your data, but it's a copy of the database that the program can understand. Now, going along with that, we've talked about this before, but I want to say it again. Most of the work we've done so far has been through select statements. Select statements do not change the database. What select statements do is they allow you to view the contents of your database tables, either one table or multiple tables if you join them together, etc. All right. Again, this is the picture. It's not really that important. Again, we're going to use link. I'd say either read the chapter, or at a minimum, read the little summaries that they put on the odd number pages here. All right. So we are going to do this today. What I showed you yesterday was correct. And what I mean is, we're going to go in and we're going to use the NuGet package manager. We're going to use it in two different ways. The first way that we're going to use it is the same way we did yesterday. We're going to go in and we're going to bring it up, and we're going to install the Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Tools and the Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. Those are givens. Those are what are going to allow us to use EF Core. All right. Then after we do that, and we do a little bit more stuff, okay, we're going to use what's called the NuGet Package Manager console, sometimes called NPM console. And we're going to put a couple commands in there. One command where we're going to, we're just literally going to put in there a command, and that command is going to say add migration. All right. And don't worry about it. Don't put it in yet. It won't work. But we also have to give that migration a name. What that is going to do is it's going to set up the schema for our database. And we will add some garbage records in there, and it'll put those records in as well. Then we'll type in update database. That will actually write things out to a database. That done by the end of the day. Why? I mean, for one reason is it's not really all that hard once you get into it. So we looked at this picture yesterday. And again, you're going to be using the Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server and the Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Tools. Those are the two that you will need. All right. And they go through the steps here. We'll do those together as a class, and those are the steps we'll follow. All right. Now, as it says here, you can start by defining the data model using classes, then use EF Core to create the database, or you can go the other way. We're doing it the way that it's explained in this first paragraph. What they explain here in this next section, and what I had problems with yesterday, was doing this. All right, I've done this before and not had problems with it. So what was the problem? I don't know. But if you look here, this says PM. That means that we're at the NuGet Package Manager console right there. All right, I'm not going to go through any of these commands because we're not going to use this. All right, we're not going to do this. All right. So like I said, I don't want to give you information that you're not really going to need. All right. One thing that was mentioned, you may see this, is that it is possible for you to get one of two when you run your commands. I didn't get this. I ran it this morning. Everything worked pretty well. All right. But if you get this yellow in here, that's not an error. So if you get yellow on yours, it's not an error. If you have an error in your code, or errors, it'll appear that rather than the code will being this color here, it'll be like a maroon type of color. All right. Hopefully when we do ours later, I've got all my steps written down and everything. Hopefully things work and come off and work like a charm. We'll see. If mine works, and if for some reason you say, Jeff, I followed all the steps, I did everything you told me to do, and mine didn't work, you're on your own one-on-one in that. And I'm happy to do that. Okay. They mention here that if you get this, it's one of two things. Either, you go and you put everything right underneath, and we're actually going to do that. I'm not going to worry about creating a models class. I'm not going to worry about creating a class library. Why? Because if you've ever heard the term obfuscate, all right, you may have heard of it, you may not have heard of it, but basically what it's doing is it's adding more complexity than you need. I'm going to do everything right underneath my project. I'm going to create classes three classes underneath my project: a books class, a reviews, or a book class, a review class, and a DB context class. I'm going to create all of those. All right. And we're going to put certain information in there. So if you were to get a message like this that comes up, one reason you can get that message is it tells you, it says, hey, you've kind of got not classified, but kind of private or sensitive information that you're putting in here, and you might want to put it someplace else. It's fine. We're putting it there anyway. The other reason that you might get an error, and you shouldn't get this error, I've never seen anybody who has, but as it says, the first one is not about not storing the connection string in your source code. That's the one I just mentioned. The second one is about the user not having view definition rights. All right. It says you learn how to address the connection string warnings later in the chapter, but typically I've never had anybody who's gotten this error or warning with view definition rights before, and I hope it doesn't start this semester. All right. So again, the DB context class, for lack of better words, it's your translator, it's your conduit, it's your go-between your program and the database. It is a .cs class. Okay, it is a .cs class. Since it is a .cs class, we're writing C# code in it. Notice that we have to include the Microsoft Entity Framework core right here. That, again, we're allowed to do that after we use the package manager, and we come in and add the Microsoft.Entity Framework core.SQL server and the Microsoft.Entity Framework core.tools. That'll allow us to add this using line here, and it'll know what it means. When you create your own context, you give it a name. We'll have our own name that we'll talk about later. All right. Now, if you don't put the using line in first, you can, but if you don't, and you put in this, you're going to get an error right here. And it'll have it'll have the little box that comes in with the arrow. And if you click on that, it says add the using statement, and it'll add that for you. All right. Okay. Then we're going to come in here, and as it's said, we're going to create this. Okay. Now, when you look at this, and I didn't do this in mine, but it probably would be a good idea. So we'll try it anyway and see if we get a problem with this or don't get a problem with this. All right. And that is, we want to come in there and we want to create what's known as these DB sets that are in here. All right. Now, we're not going to do it exactly the way that it's done in here, but we're basically going to do it the way that it's done in here. All right. And so you might say, well, geez, why aren't you doing it this way? I'm trying to take the details that are in here and make this as simple for you to understand as possible. I may succeed in that. I may fail in that. I don't know. All right. Okay. So let me go back. I want to grab that code that's right here. These two lines. I didn't put those in mine, but I want to put those in mine. So give me just a second, please, to type this in. public name and you should realize that this line right here, this line, all this is it's a no-R constructor. All right. This line right here, we're not using any options. But what it's saying is if we decide that we want to use some options, all right, then what it's saying is those options are going to be handled by the parent class, not by us. Just about done here, sorry. So all right, I'm finished. Now, what we're doing in here, just so you know, this is describing the tables we're going to have. All right. And what it's saying is this right here, that's the name of the class, and that'll be the name of the table. Because classes should be put in singular. All right. It is a class of type customer, but this is going to be a database of customers, a class of invoice, a database table of type invoices, etc. All right. So this is the DB set. So what we're doing is we're telling the system what tables we're going to have in here. All right. With us, we're going to have a books table that's going to be based off of a book class. We're going to have a reviews table that's going to be based off of a review class. Then we have a couple different things in here. All right. We've got an on configuring and an on model creating. In the on configuring, I tried to keep this as simple as possible. This is where we use this line here, this use SQL server. This is where we're setting everything up. What do I mean? This is the name of our server. This will be the name of our database. And we can put in the integrated security equal true, but we don't have to. In fact, again, let me add that to mine, please. So integrated security equal true. And again, I mentioned that previously, but I'm going to say it again anyway. What that means right there with that integrated security is there's some built-in Microsoft security that's going to be added. All right. And you're just telling it to add it. Then we've got this. All right. And in our model creating that's here, ours will be different than what's shown in the book. Why and what do I mean? Well, what you can put in here in this on model creating is anything special that you have, such as things like foreign keys, things like one-to-many relationships, what you want to have happen if you delete a parent. Now, remember, we did look at this the other day, but which meant remove the parent record, remove all the child records. But by saying client set null, like they have here, that means if you remove the parent record, set the key or the associated value in the child record to null, we're not going to do any of that. All right, so that's what else is in here. All right. The other thing that you can do in here, because they're showing you some more stuff in here, they don't have it, but we will, is what you can do in this particular on model creating is you can create what's called seed data. What do I mean by that? Well, we would want to make sure that when the program starts, that we have at least we're going to populate our book table. We're going to put in a couple of books. All right. Do we have to do this? No. All right. Do you have to do this? Just why don't we wait until we talk about the project and then I'll explain what I think you should do. All right. All right. So then they give you the code for the customer entity class. Now, when they did this, remember they went from the database to creating the classes and were what I had problems with yesterday. And they turned on data annotations. So it automatically added these types. All right. And I mentioned this yesterday. I'm going to say it again. This means it's a primary key. This means that if you show this on a query or whatever, rather than calling that customer ID with a little d, call it customer ID with a big D. And even though they didn't show it here, since this is a string inside of double quotes, we could have said customer space ID if you wanted to do that. Now, quite often, we don't see the example of this here, okay? But quite often, rather than name like they have here, okay, we would use something like first name and last name. So in here, you might do a column where if this was called first name, capital F-I-R-S-T, capital N-A-M-E, you might have changed the column to first with a capital F space, name with a capital N. That's how this is typically used. All right. Okay. Then this right here says that the length, the maximum length for this will be, the maximum length for this will be 100 characters. All right. Now, the next thing that's in there, and it's kind of interesting, is the Unicode. All right. You may or may not remember from what I've talked about with you earlier in the semester, but there were a couple times in here where we did things like this. We would say, as an example, we'd say, we create a table and we'd have a field that was called like first name. All right. And then if we gave it a type, we'd say something like varchar, and it doesn't matter. This can be a caps or whatever. It's case insensitive, 50. And I mentioned that there's also a type in there that's nvarchar. Okay. So why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because nvarchar means that you can use special Unicode characters. What the hell are those? Well, varchar says you can basically just use the regular character set, which means, things like anything you see on your keyboard. But with nvarchar, there are a lot of characters that you don't see on your keyboard that you can use. For example, and we're not going to use this in here, but just so you know, let's say you wanted to say something cost 79 cents. We typically put it in as a $sign 0.79, which is fine. But if you wanted to use 79 and use a cents, which is like the C with a line through it, that is a Unicode character. So by saying nvarchar, what you're saying is we're going to allow Unicode characters, and varchar means you're not. This says false, so we're not going to allow those. So those should be being put into the database as varchar and not as nvarchar. Okay? Now they do mention here, and I want you to hear this, they skipped the city, state, and zip. That actually would go in here. I want to say that again. It would go in here, but just for points in here, they didn't put it in. All right. Now I mentioned the key. That's the primary key. I mentioned the column, so you could change the name. All right. I mentioned the Unicode. I mentioned the string length. All right. And I mentioned foreign key. We don't really even have any foreign keys in the example we're going to do. And I didn't put any inverse properties in there either. That can be very confusing to use an inverse property. They define that as being specifies the navigation property on the other relationship. What that means is if you are putting in here a one-to-many relationship, that what the inverse property is going to show typically is going to be the many side of the one-to-many relationship. Again, we're not doing it, so we shouldn't have to worry about it. You should by now have at least somewhat of an understanding of what a foreign key is. That should make sense to everybody in here by now. All right. Okay. So how to modify the generated code. If you modify this generated code in here, why would you modify it? How would you modify it, etc.? Okay. Well, notice they're coming in here and they're using this configuration manager. What the heck is that? What they're doing is they're creating another file called app.config. And for lack of better words, they're burying that information that holds the name of the database, where the name of the server, etc. They're burying it in another file, even though they are, quote, burying, unquote, it. All right. This is considered a better practice, but anybody who knows what they're doing in here can still find this information. But it's considered cleaner to do it like than to leave that information in your context file. We're going to leave ours in the context file. Why? Because again, it's the old adage that I've mentioned to you in earlier classes, and that is we're crawling right now. We're crawling and we're getting to where we're walking. By no means are you running. All right. Those of you who are fortunate enough to have Mr. Gudmested for the class this summer, because he's going to be teaching that class. All right. He does, I think, a great job of bringing you up to where you start more or less where you're walking, and he gets you running. All right. Why is even this stuff that we're talking about here important? Because what will happen eventually, all right, with some of this stuff is in the AWD1100 class, is you're going to take this program, the program and the database, you're going to put them out on the internet. All right. So anybody can take a look at them, not necessarily manipulate them, but look at them and give them whatever permissions you want to give them. All right. So the next thing that's in here is on how to use link with EF Core. Now, let's look at the first paragraph here. To use link to retrieve data from a single table, you first create an instance of the DB context for the data model. What does that mean? It's exactly what they show right here. This is the name of your context file. All right, that's the class name. Then typically context, sometimes people use CTX instead of context. It doesn't matter. New. Then you can come in here and start doing things like what? All right, it says a query that stores all the invoices in a variable. Well, now this invoices variable that you see right here will hold everything that's in the invoices table. All right. Now, one of the key things on that line of code right there is toList. Remember that this DB context file, this thing, that's our translator. And you can't grab the information right from the database like this. You put it in a toList format so the system can understand what it is. So that's kind of translating it from database ease to C# ease, so to speak. All right. And they give you several examples in here. All right. So that was the first example. Then it says the query in the second example retrieves all rows. Okay. To do this, again, it ends with the toList. I guess that's one we just looked at. Then there's a third example that returns a single thing. When you want to return one thing, there's different ways that you can do it. The most common way of doing it is to use this first or default. And you can set up the default. Most of the time, first means just find the first occurrence of something. And default, if it doesn't find it, it usually will return null. All right. Now, if you notice here, there's first, there's single, there's first or default, and there's single or default. All right. The big difference between these, and I'm not going to read this to you, is the first or default typically won't throw an exception. It may throw an exception if you don't set a default value, but I think it just defaults to null. With the single, the first, and the single or default, if it doesn't find anything, typically then what it does is it throws an exception. Since it throws an exception, and really with all this database stuff, what you're going to see in just a few minutes is when you are playing with a database, all right, even though they don't show it in these first examples, you typically put it in a try-catch block. Why? Because when you're dealing with data, things can fail. And what you want to make sure happens is if you try to do something, whatever that something is, if you try to do something and that something fails, you want to take control over what happens next. All right. The fourth example it says there shows another way to retrieve a row by using its primary key. That's the find method. So when you use find, you are searching, but you are searching, as they say here, by primary key. So looking for what? We are looking for invoice 33 right there. All right. All right. So that's if you're, so find is set up if you're looking for one thing based on the primary key. Okay. And then finally, it says the last example shows a query that uses a join. You know now what joins are. We've done them. It uses an order by. We've done that. We didn't really use the then by descending, so let's take a look at all of those in here. This is that example right here. So this is says to order by this field dot then by, which means next, but you want that in descending order. So in other words, we're joining together here the customers table and the invoices table. All right. And we're joining it based upon the field in common, which is customer ID. This isn't identical to the way we did it in LinkPad because we didn't really have this, but most of the stuff you see right here, all right, most of the stuff that you see right there is exactly the way that we did it in class. But again, now when we did it with LinkPad, when we did this the last week, I guess it was, with LinkPad, we were only worried about it from the databases side. But now what we're doing in our final project is we're attempting to make our C# program code be able to talk with our database using our DB context file. All right. And that's exactly what they're saying in here. I'm not going to read any of this. You can read it yourselves. I would strongly suggest that you read this chapter. All right. And, I can't make people do anything. And you're going to do what you're going to do, regardless. All right. Now, they talk about how to load related objects. This is a little bit over our heads. All right. And it says you can use what's called eager loading and you can use what's called lazy loading, just to keep them simple. All right. When you use eager loading, basically you want to run the query right away. And when you use explicit or the other one, lazy loading, you don't want to do it right away. All right. I'll let you read that, but I don't think that's going to be an issue on what we're doing in here. All right. But there are so many examples in this chapter. That's why I'm saying you're not going to probably read this and understand 100% of it. This is a prelude into the AWD1115 class that you'll be taking, some of you next and some of the rest of you either in fall or spring. All right. So how to use EF Core to modify a database. These are CRUD operations that are the non-select. Insert, update, and delete. All of them, all three of them, insert, update, and delete, which we can use here as add, update, and remove. But those are the true CRUD operations because they are changing the database. All right. Again, they mention in here, you should know they don't actually communicate with a database. Rather, they update what's in the DB set collection. And then when you do the save changes, boom, that's when it writes it back to the database. So they've got examples in here. The first example that they show here is how you can add. So this is a way to add, in this case, a new customer. Notice that when you do it like this, all right, you put in the name of the customer, you put in the address of the customer, the city, the state, and the zip. You do not put in the customer ID. All right. That was basically set up as an identity field. So it'll be put in there for you. All right. And look up above that at this little chart that's at the top. Save changes, as it says right there. Save changes saves all pending changes to the database itself. All right. And it returns the number of entries that were affected. Now, why is that important? Because in this case, it should return one, right? I added one new customer. Here I'm setting it up. Here I'm doing the add. Here I'm setting it up. Here I'm doing the update. Here I'm setting it up. Here I'm doing the delete. All right. So if you do need to, you could were returned or whatever. Why? Well, in this case, what this says is I want to update just that customer, right? So that should return one. This is one. This is one. All right. But it is possible for you to write queries. What if you put in the wrong zip code for everybody? If you remember that example we did back in those link exercises, and we had Belleville, Illinois in there. And let's just say that their zip code was 63333. All right. So we put that in. Now we find out later that, you know what, it was really 63334. Well, we could change it by grabbing every customer and changing them one at a time. Or there is a way that we can go in and change things in a multiple way. In the example they're showing here, this is the way it's oftentimes done. All right. And what I mean is, if you're going to be making updates, if you're going to be deleting something, if you're going to be adding something, you do one at a time. It's considered the safest way of doing it. I may or may not have mentioned this before. I honestly don't remember. But, or regardless of whether I mentioned it or didn't mention it before, the most dangerous command you can put into a database is delete or remove. Because once they're gone, they're gone. So what you find, what happens often is you either take that customer, if they're not going to be a customer anymore, you either take them and you might have a field in the each table that's called active or active customer. And while that person is one of your customers, you set it to true. And then if they leave you for whatever reason, you set it to false. All right. And you probably already get this, but just as an example, for years, I have had American Family for my insurance, all my insurance needs, as they say. But if I decided, let's say, that I was going to move from American Family to, let's say, AAA for my car insurance, all right, they might not remove me as a customer. They might take my active customer status and set it to false. And the reason that you sometimes do that too is, what if I was at American Family and now I had an accident and I didn't like the way they treated me, so I wanted to go, I'm sorry, I went to AAA and I had an accident and I didn't like the way they treated me, so I wanted to go back to American Family. Now all they have to do is take that flag of active customer and set it back from false to true. If you don't do that, sometimes what companies do is they have literally, they would create a table that might be called deleted customers, and they put the customers in there. They don't, I mean, remove is such a scary thing, because if you remove something and then you change your mind, the only way to get it back is to add all that information in again. All right. Okay. So again, we've talked about now the add, the update, and the delete. I mentioned the save changes. We talked about cascading deletes earlier, and you can cascade updates as well. All right. And, maybe you think, man, you know what? Yes, I am. And I'm doing it on purpose, because what I want people to think, at least, I'm hoping this, is maybe as piss poor as yesterday's lecture was, will be as good as today's was, and that you'll understand everything that we're going over. That's why I'm not trying to skip anything here. All right. Save changes is an interesting method. They mention in here that when you call save changes, you can experience a hit in performance. Think about it. If you are American Family and you want to update a table, and that table has millions of records in it, all right, to do the save changes, boom, it might not go like that. It might take a few seconds or longer. All right. But as it says, when you use save changes to save the changes to the database, it throws an update exception if it encounters any errors. What does that mean? They give an example here. What if you tried to add a row to a table that already, or with a primary key that already exists? This update doesn't mean that it was an update operation. It could be an update operation. It could be an insert. The example they give here is, and you put a required column that must be unique, and you put in something so it's not unique. All right. The point is, as they say here, you're typically going to do your database operations within a try catch block. All right. And that's what they're going to end up showing on the next page here. All right. So they come in here and it says delete, and you want to delete the customer's name. All right. So what is this? This is the message box. Okay? And it says here that if you put yes, that you said, I want to delete it, come in here and try. Now, why would that fail? Maybe there's something in that customer's file or whatever that doesn't allow them to be deleted. Or maybe the person trying to do the deletion doesn't have the not the responsibility, but they haven't been granted the access to be able to do that. All right. Again, if I was doing this, not only would I catch the DB update exception, but down below that, I would just catch a regular exception. So if it threw something other than this, I would know what the heck it threw. All right. And again, that's explained in here probably better than the way that I did it. All right. All right. Now, the next section, we're going to buzz through this fairly quickly. Why? Because as I mentioned yesterday, concurrency occurs when two different people are attempting to access the same database record. Since we are each working on our own, since we're using our own machine as both a client and as a server, all right, we're not going to have this issue. Let's talk about when you could get that issue. Let's suppose, we're doing this bookstore, books, whatever you call it, for our final. Let's assume we make it a full-fledged bookstore, okay? And let's assume we put it out on the internet. We're actually going to sell books. I mean, this is contrived. I'm making this up, but just play along with me if you would. All right. So we put this out there as an online bookstore. All right. And we're selling, let's say, IT or information technology related books, programming, web design, etc. And we have we have maybe two of each book in stock. Well, we could have a concurrency conflict if, for example, let's say that a bunch of people tried buying it at the same time. All right. We could have a concurrency conflict if I came in and realized that somebody misspelled the title. So I brought up that record and somebody else said, oh, the price is wrong. So at the same time, I'm bringing up the record to change the title. They're bringing up the record to change the price. All right. And so what happens? And they say it depends on the concurrency control that's used by the programs. All right. It says with EF Core, you have two main choices. Again, we don't have to worry about this, but it says by default, it's last in wins. So if I go in and I change the title and I save it, and then another person comes in, well, we both have the same record open and they change the price and save it, their change takes effect and it overrides mine. All right. That's a bad way of doing it. So as it says, to prevent errors like this, many programs use optimistic concurrency that checks to see whether a row has been changed since it's been retrieved. The only way it can be changed since it's been retrieved is if somebody else opens up the same table and does something to the same record. And they mentioned there that if that happens, it doesn't save the data. It throws an exception. That's probably the best way of doing it. All right. The third way, and I mentioned this yesterday, just for completeness here, on the bottom of the page, that's called pessimistic concurrency. And you can either lock an entire database. So if I'm looking at any table, any record in there, you can't touch it. All right. You can also lock a table. You can even typically lock on a record level. All right. But as they mentioned, it's barely used. Now they show how you can work on that, but again, it's not an issue for us. So I'm going to skip over all this concurrency stuff in here. All right. I'm not trying to cheat you. It's just that it doesn't exist for us. All right. So the next thing that's in here is how to bind controls. It's 8:59. Let's take till 9:10. Let's take our first break and we'll come back. We'll finish the chapter. After we finish the chapter, we're going to jump right into our discussion of the project. I'll see you at 9:10. All right, it's 9:10, so let's continue on. Now, the next section, we did not go over this yesterday. All right, but they're talking about binding controls. When you think about binding controls, I don't remember if they showed a picture here. I guess they don't. All right, when you think about it, what we've done so far is, for example, when you get a text box, all right, and you want to put something in it, we've been manually putting something in it. We went from there and we used things like list boxes and drop down lists where we could go in and we could add that stuff either programmatically or in our properties window in the items collection. But what they're talking about here, starting with how to bind controls to a collection, is, for example, if you want to fill in a drop down or a combo box, if you want to fill it in with the values of a database, all right, this is how we could do it. The advantage of doing that is as the database gets updated, when you run the program again, the combo box should be updated as well. So as they mentioned here, when you use Entity Framework Core, typically called EF Core, you can bind controls to an entity collection or to the results of a query. So you're going to see both of those. All right. So as it says, to start, you can bind a control to a collection as shown in the first example. When you do that, notice that there is a property in a combo box called data source. All right. And as it says, you can do this programmatically, which is the way it's oftentimes done. And at least sometimes you can do, depending on the complexity of what you're doing, you can also set up things in the properties window. All right. So they mention what's going on in here. It says the first statement sets the data source property of the combo box to the collection returned from the to list. What does that mean? That means that this right here is going to go out to the database. All right. And when it goes out to the database, it's going to find all of our customers. Now, the next two lines are unbelievably important. All right. This is how you're distinguishing between customers. It's the primary key. Each customer will have his or her own or their own customer ID. This is what you can display in the combo box itself. Why does that matter? Because when you do your project and you've got a combo box, all right, you're going to be filling it up with names of authors as an example. Okay. All right. So they're showing in here basically how you can set this up. But I do want to mention to you, all right, that the data source member, the display member, these things are also normally, you can see them in the properties window as well. By putting things in and putting them in code, you are taking total control. All right, which is typically as a programmer what you're going to want. All right, you are specifying exactly in here what you want to happen. So as they mention up here, the data source, that's the data that you want to display. The display member, all right, as it says, that's the data column that's displayed in that list box or combo box or whatever. The value member is where it's stored. Another example of this that you see quite often, all right, because this isn't just done in here. This is done in other kinds of applications. But as an example, a lot of times, if you've got a drop-down list, is you'll see a list of the 50 states. So we'd see, for example, we'd see Missouri in there. But that would be the display member, but the actual value member would probably be MO, because each state is a different, not each state, but they're different lengths for the states. Plus, it takes a lot less storage to store 2 characters as opposed to something like, I don't know, like Wisconsin, which is probably about 9 characters as opposed to 2. All right, so display is what you show on the screen. Value is basically how it's going to be stored. All right, and that's what they're talking about in here. So they're setting it up in here as it says, and they're using string literals, the actual values. And here they're using what's called the name of property. There's 2 different ways of doing the same thing. All right. Notice you can use these bound controls to display, add, modify, or delete data. But if you make any changes that are going to change the database, you got to use the save changes for it to take place. All right. Now, the next thing that's in here is this data access class. All right. And they talk about things in here about dependency injection and a few other things that are in here. Most of the stuff in this section is over everybody's head where you are right now. And when I say that, I'm not at all trying to belittle anybody, but I'm trying to make sure that you've got basically 2 weeks to get this project done. And I don't want to overwhelm you with so much information that it's like, geez, do I have to use this? Do I not have to use this, etc.? I don't think you're going to have to worry about working with a data access class. All right. Now, read it. Maybe you'll disagree with me, and maybe you'll say, oh, that's a lot better way of doing it than the way that you showed it in class. Okay. But most of the stuff that's in here, to my knowledge, is more along the lines of what's discussed in the next chapter, which we're not talking about in here. So that's why I'm skipping that section. And that gets us right to the end here. And when I say the end, there's still 12 pages left, but this is the customer maintenance app. I've given you a copy of this. Now, I've given you a copy of this, all right? And it says here, let's see. Now that you have the basic skills for all this stuff, you're ready to see a complete app. Yeah, right. The user interface. So when we look at this, this is the interface. I mentioned this the other day, but it was the end of class, so we didn't spend much time on it. So when you look at this, all right, this is an application with two different forms on it. The first form, as it says, will allow you to enter a customer ID. And if that customer exists, when you click the Get Customer button, it'll show you the information for that customer. Hopefully, what you notice when you look on here is every text box that's in here, except for the customer ID, they're all read-only. This is a maintenance form that's going to allow you to just look at things. If you decide after doing this that indeed Daryl Rascano is the person that you want to update, all right, then you can click the modify button and it'll bring this up with all of Daryl's information in it. Now you'll notice, all right, now you'll notice that all of the text boxes that are in here are readable, writable, all right, and that the state has been put in as a drop down. Now notice what's not in here. Customer ID. That's a set it and forget it type of field. So once you've set that, if for some reason you screwed up and you don't want that customer to have that ID anymore, typically you want to do that as early in the process as possible. You drop the customer, you remove them, and you add them again. But you really should never go in and modify a primary key once it's been set. Now, there are people, I'm sure, who would disagree with what I just said. I don't want to fight with you or with them on it. All right. Now, if you click the add button, you're not trying to add this guy. He's already in there. All right. But if you come up and you click the add button, then it's going to bring this up, but it's going to be blank. I don't know if it sets it to please enter a state here or if it's Alabama or what. It doesn't matter. But if I wanted to come in and add Jeff Scott here, all right, and I click the add, now I could put in my name, I could put in my address, city, I could put in my state, and I could put in my zip code, and then click accept. Now, a couple things about this. I don't like the way that our final project is set up exactly, and I'll explain that in just a bit. I don't like the way this is set up. And what I mean by that is this is expecting that you're going to be smart enough to put in last name, comma, first name. And I don't mean at all to say you're not smart, but if somebody comes in there and puts in a first name, last name, and doesn't put a comma in there, takes it with no problem. All right. So, I mean, it's not, I would have broken that up into two fields. They didn't. Okay, fine. In addition, just so you know, if I come in here and I put in, let's say, Missouri, and let's say that my area code is 63385, which is the area code for Wentzville. If I put in there 55555, there's no check mechanism. It'll just put in the wrong one. All right. And when you think about it, that would be a hell of a thing to have to do because there are a lot of cities. I mean, if I come in here and say New York, for example. There's 145 different zip codes just for New York. All right. And even period. All right. I don't know how many, according to this, look at that, 41,704. And the reason I'm telling you that, again, I'm not wasting my time or your time, but it's assuming you know what you're doing. If you wanted to have it populate this automatically, that would be a hell of an operation to have to do. All right. Now, if you were working for a company, that might be worth it. You might want somebody to do that if they put in a city and a state, that it automatically populates the zip code for them, or maybe not. All right. In addition, if you click delete, it does come up and it shows you a message box that asks you to confirm that that's indeed who you want to delete. All right. And that's pretty much what gets explained in here. I don't think I missed anything from the previous page here. So again, that's your interface. All right. And as it says, at this point, you may be wondering why this customer maintenance app uses two forms. The answer is that most apps in the real world aren't this simple. In many cases, it says the maintenance of a table will be combined with other functions. So believe it or not, they're trying to show this in as simplified a way as possible, just because of the fact that if there were, let's say, uh, the equivalent of a table, or I'm sorry, the equivalent of a form for each field in here, you can just imagine how big something like that could get in a hurry. All right. So the next thing that they show in here, show the customer maintenance form. It says it starts by importing. Well, this is where those classes were. All right. When they created them earlier, that's why they're importing that, to make all that stuff available. All right. Says it starts with a default constructor that's generated by Visual Studio. Then it declares two variables. The first they work with is data instant access class, which again, I don't think we'll have to work with. And the second stores the customer that's in the form. Let's just take a look. All right. So that's the data access class, and that's the customer. All right. So what are we doing right here? Okay. Well, what's kind of neat is they're actually bringing some stuff back from chapter 12. All right. If you remember, that was back on around page 224 or 218 or something like that. I don't remember. But we had is valid data, and we had things in there like is in 32, um, is decimal, is string, is within range, is present, etc. And this stuff doesn't necessarily go away. But notice what we're doing in here. So this is assuming that we put in a customer that we want to bring up their information in. So it's going to look for it in here. If it's null, it says no customer was found with that. All right, with that ID. And what does that mean? Well, let's assume that you had 10 customers and they were 1 through 10. Now let's assume that you didn't follow the best practices that I mentioned to you before. Okay. And at customer 8, you just remove them. So now you come in here and you say 8. All right. And it will come back and say no customer found, though it doesn't exist. But remember, when you fill this up yourself, you don't put in the ID. So that 8 is kind of just lost forever. All right. So we're coming in here, like I said, we're looking for it. If we can't find it, boom. But if we can find it, we display the customer. Now this data access exception, remember, it's looking in here for an integer right there. So if I leave it blank, or if I put in something non-numeric, then this is going to get caught. The data access exception, and it'll handle it in some way. All right. The validity check is pretty simple. It's an isInt 32. Again, when you look at this, this is virtually identical, if not identical, to what we've been doing. So there's really nothing new in here. All right, as far as the is valid data. All right. So what are we doing in here? Well, hopefully clear controls make sense. All right. It's taking every one of those fields and it's blanking them out. All right. That all of our text boxes. All right. So it's empty. And it's also disabling our modify and delete button because we've cleared everything out. There's nothing in there. So again, I know you probably get it already, but that is this right here, but with nothing in it. In fact, this right here, but this is empty, that's empty, that's empty, and that's it. All right. To display the customer, notice we're going kind of in the other direction. Okay. But the new thing here, this selected customer, we're filling that information from the database. All right. And each one of those text boxes, all right, the one you're not going to be able to jack with again will be the customer ID. But you now have the modify button enabled. You now have the delete button enabled. Okay. This was that handle the access that we showed before. So that was if you made an error right here. Where is it? There. And again, that would typically mean you put something non-numeric in there or you left it blank, which again would be non-numeric. All right. Then we've got the add. Think about what we want to do when we add. All right. What we're saying is we want to add a new customer. All right. If we assume that all the fields that are in there for the customer, the name, the address, the city, the state, the zip, etc., are all mandatory, we have to check to make sure something is in there. All right. And that it's the right type. So a zip code, and let's just say we have set that up as an integer field, not saying we did or didn't, but let's say we did, and you leave it blank or you put something non-numeric in there, again, it must be handled. All right. All right, then we modify. Again, you notice when you look in here that everything is inside of a try catch once we get in here. All right, and then finally the delete. X to use their typical simple exit that they have in here. All right. And there's not like a real little bit of code in here. All right. So this is the code here for the add modify custom. Remember, it's the same form. It's just if it's an add, you want all the fields to be empty. And if it's a modify, you want them to be filled with their current values. All right. And that's what they're showing here. They load the state combo box, etc. Display the customer data, but they only want to display the customer data if it's not a new customer. All right. There's a lot of gold nuggets, so to speak. Look at this program and see if you can understand this program, because it will help a lot in your understanding of what's going on. So notice there's an is valid data for the add modify customer. All right. So this is going to be called, all right. And it says there, if it's not equal to nothing, so it's going to see if there's something present in there. This is going to be called if you're loading the existing stuff in there. And that's it. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that was probably just one of my most fantastic lectures ever, but hopefully what that did was it started to help in your understanding of what's going on here. All right. And if I failed in that, you're going to have to let me know. All right. So let's bring this up. This is the final project. Now, if you add all the points up, it equals 250. What does that mean? That means it's 2.5 tests. Also, your electronic portfolio is 150. All right. What I typically do, let's just put it this way. There is virtually a 100% chance of what I'm about to tell you. Okay. And that is I take your low grade for the semester, whatever it is. If it was you bombed a test, fine. And I throw it out. I don't include it in your grades. That's not done right now. I wait till the end of the semester. All right. But what I'm telling you is the final project and the electronic portfolio, those must be turned in. Even if they're incomplete, even if you don't think they're any good, even if whatever. And that's 4 tests worth of material. That's enough to make you sink or swim as far as your grade. All right. So we're going to create a bookstore application that stores books for a minimum of 3 authors. You can put in more if you want, but at a minimum, you need to put in 3 authors. One author has got between 1 and 4 books. One author has got between 5 and 10 books, and one author has more than 10 books. This is meant to be as realistic as possible. So as it says there, use real book information that you can find online. All right. I typed in online IMDb, which is the movie database, but I said for books. And someplace in here, and I don't remember where it is, but I know that someplace in here, movies based on books. Maybe that's it. Maybe there's a books IMDb. All right. IMDb, greatest books. So there you go. So if you go out to here, all right. In fact, I don't need the list. Should just be able to go out to this. I'm wondering if that's going to bring me to the movie one, but I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's the movie one. So you might want to do what I just said before, and that is just go out to here. Oops. And look for it from there. So let's see. Again, that was here, so I'm going to put that back up there again. All right. But if you go and search for IMDb books, you should be okay. All right. Now, since we want real information, all right, let's say in here I come in here and I'm going to search for John Steinbeck. He's a fairly famous author. All right. There's East of Eden, Cannery Row, the Pearl, the Red Pony. Well, that's at least 4 books, I think, hopefully at least. But if I look in here, all right, those look like movies, but I still have to make sure. All right, so maybe these are movies. I don't know. Maybe what I grabbed was wrong. All right, let's see if we can find this. Because those were movies made from books. Is there a literary works version of IMDb? Says not really, no. Goodreads is the most popular platform. Well, let's look and see what Goodreads is. All right, I would guess you can come in here. So search by title, author. Again, I'll just put in John Steinbeck and search. And notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's the one you can use if you want to then for 5 to 10. All right. And there's a lot, I think the other one I thought of was Rudyard Kipling. All right. And there's a bunch of them. Okay. So you come up with 3 different authors is what we're saying. So goodreads.com looks like a good place to get you started in there. Okay. There we go. Come up and you find an author with 5 books or less than 5, 5 to 10, and greater than 10. Boom. There's 27 of your points right there. You do it based on real stuff, that's 36 of your points right there. Now, the author drop-down list should allow for filtering the results by author. Use the link where function. Well, what does that mean? There's an author drop-down right here. That's saying to me that that should be populated using the where function. So if I click Edgar Allan Poe, all right, then in here, it should fill up the books for Edgar Allan Poe. Now, again, I mentioned yesterday, or I think I did, and if I didn't, I'm saying it now, this is not a great example because it's showing the same book in here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. No, it should be 5 different books from Edgar Allan Poe. All right. So I know he's got like The Raven and there's a bunch of other ones that he wrote. I don't care, but they should say. All right. If you click on one of these, on just one of the ones that's in here, okay, then it should basically bring this up. So there's 2 different forms. This is your main form, unless you decide you want to put in some kind of a splash screen, all right, which you can do, but you're not required to do, all right? And when you choose a book, it should have a picture of the book. So you're going to need to create an images for put actual pictures of the books in there. All right. There's the title of the book. There's the year the book was published. There's the ISBN number for the book, which is stupid because none of them have that ISBN. And that's the author information. So on your main page, you're going to allow the person to search and either search by author or search by ISBN. All right. So when you put in a value here or 1 here and you click search, it should fill in down here. This looks to me like a data grid view. All right, we'll talk about the pagination in a minute. When you tell it to delete, or when you say, when you just click on one of these, it should bring up this one, which is the book's details. So that's the information about a book. What you should be able to do in there then is you should be able to write your own review. So this is Palladian. All right. And if I thought the book stunk, I could put in here, this was a terrible book. I hated it. And then type submit. Then the top review should now be shown with, that was a terrible book. I hated it. All right. Let's go back. So again, the drop-down list should be programmatically populated when the form loads, using the link select and unique functions. What does that mean? that drop-down list with the authors, all right, you're going to have the same author. So if you had Edgar Allan Poe for 5 books, then Poe will be in there 5 times, but you only want to show him once in the drop-down. You only want to show John Steinbeck once in the drop-down, etc. All right. On the search form, when the user clicks the search button, again, you can search by either the ISBN or by the author. Either way. It's going to be different depending on which one you put in. But notice again, you use the link where function, and each one of those is worth 10 points. Then on the search form, okay, it says the correct result should be returned and displayed below the search controls. So you put all this stuff in there. What does this mean right here? This. All right, that is this. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4 things. All right. If more than 5 results are returned, you should implement pagination. Now, this is going to take some thought on your part. I put a link in here. This is not the only link for this, but this is one I found that I thought was at least decent. So if you click on here, it brings up those .NET tutorials, and they explain pagination, what pagination is. Basically, what it is it's saying we only want 5 records to show on each page. So how to implement it? All right. You can implement it using the skip and the take method. So they show an example here where they have, for example, I don't know if it's 4 or 5, but it's like you put the first 5 on one page, then the next 5 on another page, then the next 5 on another page. So that's what they're showing here. They didn't implement it very well, but just so you see it. So what that is saying is doing something like that should give you something like this. So set it up. What does that mean? That means that you're one author. So if Edgar Allan Poe has less than 5 books, there'll be no pagination for him. There'll be just a 1 right there. That's all there is. If it's John Steinbeck and he has, let's say, 8 books, all right, meaning it's between 5 and 10, then 5 should show on the first page. And if you click 2 right there, then 3 should show on the second page. And if we had Rudyard Kipling in there and he had, let's say, 15 books, then the first 5 would show on page 1, the second, 6 through 10 on page 2, and 11 through 15 on page 3. And again, this is one way that you can implement that. So any results with less than 5 books should disable or hide, so don't show those buttons. And it says, don't forget to round up when you determine how many pages are in the result. What does that mean? That means if there's 8, you'll need 2 pages, 5 on one page and then 3 on the other. Now, if you decide you want to make one of yours as an example, let's say with 16 books, then instead of having 3 pages like it shows there, you'd have 4. Books 1 to 5 would be on page 1. Books 6 to 10 would be on page 2. Books 11 through 15 would be on page 3. And book 16 would be on page 4, if you'd like to do that. All right. When the details button is clicked for a book on the search form, all right, and I think, yeah, that's the details button there. So when you click that button, it should bring this up. What does that mean? Every book that you have should have an image, should have a title, should have a year that it was published, should have an ISBN, should have an author. You should set this up for each one, but it's possible if it's either a new book or it's an unreviewed book, you might have past reviews here and this could be empty. That's totally fine if that's the case. All right. So that's the stuff that should be on there. The user, you be able to add new reviews to a book using that form. The application should implement the book class. The application should implement the review class. The application should represent the search form class, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute, and the details form. We'll talk about both those in just a second. Now, look at the last thing that's on there. With some people, that's going to drive nuts, or they're going to say, I can't do this, etc. Many years ago, when I was your age, I took a class, and it was a class called Systems Analysis and Design, where we basically had to grab a system and kind of decompose it ourselves and explain how it was set up, etc. At the end of the semester, at the end of the semester, um, you had to give a presentation in front of the class on it. I did mine. It wasn't great. It was okay. But I remember a guy who went after me. I don't remember his name, but I can remember what he looked like. And he got up there and literally he was drenched in sweat. All right. He's like, he started talking. It was like this. No, no, no. And finally he said, I can't do this. And the teacher said, you really can't? And he said, no, I can't. I'm sorry. The teacher said, that's fine. He was like, whew. And the teacher said, yeah, I'm offering the class next semester. You can take it then. And the guy was like, that isn't fair. So he told him to go outside, go use the facilities, get a drink, and come back. And we do another one in the interim. He came back and it wasn't good, but he did it. Now, yours is actually going to be easier than that because you don't have to show your face at all if you don't want to. You can write down exactly what you want to say, etc. Now, what I did was I went out and I Googled free video creation software, type of things. And guess what? It came back with 26,400,000 results. So I looked at just a couple of them and I grabbed this one. And I'm not saying you got to use this, but it was called, I believe it's like Animaker or something like that. Not this. There we go. So how you can make, and this could be you, pictures in there that you can use. There's other ones. If you don't want to do it with this, just find your own. You can even just use YouTube, but I think you have to sign up for an account and do a few other things. I could be wrong, but I know I did when I set up my YouTube channel. All right. And when you look at that, that's 30 points of the 250. That's 12% of the grade. All right. So if you don't do it, you're already down to an 88, is what I'm saying. So you've got to create your own video, a minimum of 10 minutes, up to 20 minutes. You should explain the project you created and give a demo. And you can talk about anything in this class that worked or anything in this class that didn't work. All right. Now, am I going to make these available to everybody in your class? I don't know, but my guess is probably. Why? Because people who are in the seated classroom are doing this also. All right. No, they're not doing it in front of the class. They're making a 10 to 20 minute video, just like you're supposed to do. And typically the instructor shares them with everybody else in the class. So I'll need a link to your video and yeah, I'll share it with everybody else. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about this. Okay. And then we'll move down. All right. 2 forms. Again, if you want to have a third form, put on it whatever, a splash screen, put on it whatever you want. And I'm not going to lie to you. I just tell you real quick on mine, on my splash screen, I found a picture of each one of the authors that I used. I put that in there and then buttons to allow them to go to this form. You shouldn't be able to jump from a splash screen to here. That doesn't make any sense. But I allowed you to jump from the splash screen to this form here. So again, look at this. Label, label, text box, drop down list, button. All right, these in here are all in the data grid view. All right, remember the data grid view, what it has in it, it has the ability to do what? All right, a data grid view to add, delete, or update. We're not doing any of those. So you're adding this on the outside, basically, of the data grid view, the details button. Again, when you click this, it should bring up this. If you've got more than 5 records, it should implement pagination. All right, that's what each one of these should look like. Hopefully what I'm saying makes sense, and hopefully, if for some reason it does not make sense, you will ask. All right, feel free to send me an email if something doesn't make sense in here. I will tell you, you're probably going to struggle with at least part of this. All right, so let's go down here. Now I'm going to go to this one in a minute, but first let's look at this one. These are the 2 entity classes. So these are going to be your 2 tables. You'll have a table of books. Each book will have an ISBN. Each book will have an author's name. Each book will have a book name. I wouldn't have used these names, but that's what, I would have called them: book ISBN, book author, book title, book publish year, and book reviews, and book image. But this has already been written, so it's fine. You'll notice that all of these are implemented as public. So we'll use the get set with set. You'll see this, because we're going to do this. All right, this is what you have to do. Now, I had problems with the reviews. I almost canceled class today. So what I did for now was I removed the reviews from here. Am I going to put it back? I sure as heck hope so. I can't find my version of this that I did in the past. I had a completed version. I have no flaming clue where it is. So I found another partial version of it was working with that one. All right, so the one that we create right now will not have these reviews in it. All right, if I figure it out myself or whatever, I'll either do another video or whatever, but I'll show you what I did. All right, then you can see we've got a NOR constructor in here. Okay, then we've got a review. Well, hopefully you know this by now. Review inherits from book. So review of a book. It has just one field in it, review text. That's the review itself. It has a constructor where you pass in that review text. And it has a toString that you override. Now, you're going to see all this in just a moment. But, like with the toString, I didn't put anything in there. You figure out what it is you want to show. All right? Now, this looks a little confusing. It says you're inheriting from form. I mean, what the hell is that? Well, when you look here, I'm just going to grab an older program. Okay, I'm just going to go out and grab an older program of mine. Doesn't matter which one I grab. So I'm going to go out to beginning of the year, and I'm going to go to, how about this, array demo. All right, something we did a long, long time ago. And remember, I don't want that one. I don't want a console. So let me just bring the other one up. That'll be my startup. And let me get rid of this. So let's close that tab. Okay, so real simple. I don't care. Why am I showing you this? Well, I'm showing you this because if we look at the code, notice what this says. Form 1, because I didn't change the name, inherits from form. So in other words, these are going to be the two forms. The details form that's going to need an existence of book, and the search form, which will need the stuff that's shown here. This is saying that you will probably at least need to put in these variables in your search form and make them private because of the minus. All right. You don't have to go out and create a brand new class for these. All right. They already are, basically. Okay. Now, I don't know if I made this easy to understand. You know that whether you're live or whether you're watching it on tape, if something does not make sense here, please email me. Write down the question, email it to me, and I'll attempt to answer it for you. Okay, let me make sure I'm still on, that it didn't kick me off. Yes, I am. All right, we're going to build the book and we're going to build the review. All right, I'm going to do that with you right now. I would suggest you follow along and do it with me. If I'm going too fast, just put a note out here and say it, but I'm not going to try to do it fast. That what we have to do for the rest of the period here isn't going to take a long time. I'm going to keep going and I'm not going to give a break because we should be done no later than 10:30 and possibly before that. Could I be wrong? I'm wrong a lot. All right. So yes, I could be wrong. So I'm coming out to the desktop and I'm going to create a new folder out here. And again, I'd suggest you do the same. Call it what you want. I'm going to call mine what it is. Final project. Capital F and then final, capital P in project. So there it is. It says, hey, you already got one out here. I didn't know that. So I'm going to take this one, see if I can move it. Okay. Now it'll let me make one that's called final project. You probably don't have one that's called final project, so you should be just fine. There it is. All right. Then I'm going to start up a new instance of Visual Studio 2022. All right. And I am going to create a new project. All right. It will be a Windows Forms app that will not be with .NET Framework. So Windows Forms app right here. And I'm going to just call everything what it is. So the name of the project will be Final Project. If I can spell. All right. In fact, let's do this. We'll call the name of we'll call it Final Project App. All right. And then I'm going to put it into a folder on my desktop called Final Project. Whoop, it looks like I've already got stuff in there. So I want to double check and make sure. Final Project. Well, that's empty. Let's double check it again. Why it's showing me that? It's because I've got another, I must have another folder out there with that name. So let's look. I have a Final Project here, and I have one here. It shouldn't let me have even created that. So let me remove that one there. And again, I'm going to type in Final Project. Looks like it took it. All right. So I want to come here and I want to go to the desktop and find Final Project. It's empty. That's what I want. All right. And I'm going to change the name of the solution and I'm going to call it Final Project Solution. So I've got in here for my project name, Final Project App. I'm putting it into a folder called Final Project, and I'm calling my solution Final Project Solution. You can call yours something different if you want. All right, that's up to you, but this is what I'm calling everything. All right, and I'm clicking next. Make sure that yours is your latest version. For me, it's version 8. Click Create. And it's going to eventually bring up the form. I'm not going to do a flaming thing with this form, just so you know. So when I run this program later, it's only going to show this form. That's your, so this right here is either going to be a splash screen or it's going to be this one. And I already showed you how to set that up. Label, text box, drop down list, button, grid view, I'm sorry, data grid view, buttons, label, buttons. Over here, picture box, label, label, probably a multi-line text box, button, and a bunch of labels. All right. So hopefully all that makes sense, but we don't care about that for right now. All right. What I want to do next is I want to install the entity framework. So, and again, there's different ways that you can do this. I want to show you something in case you hadn't seen it before. I've shown it to you like this. And that is, let me close that. All right. I've come in there and done tools, NuGet package manager, which totally is fine. You can also right mouse click on your project and there is a manage NuGet packages from there as well. Either one will bring you to here, but this one brings you to the one you wanted to go to. If you don't want to do that one, then you've got to go to tools, NuGet package manager, and choose the middle option, manage NuGet packages for solution. All right. So doing it the other way by doing from here, it's a little bit of a shortcut. Not much, but a little bit. All right. So we want to install, it should be empty. We want to go over to browse. And I'm going to type in here, Microsoft, try to type it slow, dot entity framework core. Microsoft dot entity framework core. All right, well, it's not finding anything. I don't know why. I put a dot in there. It still says no packages found. All right, then let's just do this. I'll type in entity framework core, just that. There we go. And what we want to bring in here again is two things. These two, Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.tools and Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.sql server. And again, I believe the order in which you bring them in doesn't matter, but I always bring in, tools first. So there it is, entityframeworkcore.tools. Click in the box here for project, click install. It'll come up, you'll either get two dialogues here or one, but accept that. Now that one is in here. Now I want to bring in the other one, which is SQL Server. So I'm going to do the same thing. Click there, click install, click accept. Now I've shown you this yesterday and I'm going to show it to you again. I like to get out of here and then get back in again. Let's get back in the other way. We'll right mouse click and choose manage NuGet packages. And under installed now, not under browse, but under installed, I've got these two. Now, I don't know why these are in there. I don't know. I didn't put them in, but these two are in there. I know they're installed. All right. So I've got those two things in there now. So I'm now ready to start working with the entity framework core. How can I verify that that's the case? I can come to this right here, and I am going to put a line of code in it. So I'm going to view code and go right to the top. And I now can say using. Notice if I type in M, it finds Microsoft dot entity framework core dot SQL server. It's all in there. All right. Now, depending on what you're doing, it might rather just have the entity framework core, or it might want the .SQL server. Okay. But we've now come in there and installed the entity framework. Okay. So next, let's go in and create our two model classes. All right. And that is this one and this one. Again, when I did mine, couple things I changed on here. First of all, when you do this, since they're going to be database tables, they both need an ID field, a primary key. So I added book ID at the top here, and I added review ID on the top here. All right, I kept ISBN just as it is. I kept author name, book name, publish year just as they were. I'm having problems with the reviews, so I left that out. I may put that back in later. If I do and I get it to work, I will create another video where I'll talk slowly and I'll explain to you exactly what I did. All right, then we've got the image. I made the image a string instead of system.drawing.image, and we have a NOAR constructor. So let's make that one first with the changes that I just mentioned to you. So in my project here, I'm going to right mouse click on the name of my project, choose add, choose class. Remember, classes are singular. So I'm going to type in here book.cs, and there it is. As you always see me do on these, I don't need these, and I make this public. Okay, so let's fill this up. It's not very big, but I'm going to say public int book ID with a get set. And again, that will be our primary key. Okay, you don't need to put that down as a comment. You can, it's up to you. All right, now what I did with each one of these is I didn't want to have any errors in there that says, you got to watch out for non-nulls. So let me show you how I did that. Public string, and I put a question mark at the end of it. And then ISBN with a get set. I'm just going to fill the whole thing in and we'll go over all of them. And I even put a question mark here. All right. And then finally, I had a NOAR constructor. That is my entire book class from the top right there. Now, again, later, I hope to go back and add in that list of reviews, but it was either not get that to work and not lecture today, but give you this lecture tomorrow, or do what I've done today. And I decided to do it this way. I'll try to investigate this afternoon. If I come up with a fix or whatever, I'll show it to you. So that is the book.cs class. Not perfect, not exactly the way that it was shown in the book, but it's the way I did it. Oh, file. And I'm going to add the second class. So again, I'm going to right mouse click on here. I'm going to go to add class, and this will be review.cs. All right. Now, that was shown like this. I added a review ID, so it'll have a primary key when we make it into a database table. All right. I don't think it would work without that, but maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. All right. So again, I'm going to remove all this. I'm going to make this public. I think I made the one for book public. I want to double check. I did. Okay. So this is review, public class review. I started with a public int review ID. with a get set. And the only other field that's in here is a public string. We were told to call that review text. That's going to be the review itself. Again, with a get set. All right. And then we did have a full arg constructor this time. All right. So public review, public review. And again, we're passing in a string that we'll call review text. All right. And let's see if the IntelliSense will pick it up for us. Maybe not. Review text equal review text. All right. I don't know why it's giving me that, but we'll look in just a second, okay? All right, and finally, I'm going to override the toString method. All right, and for now, because you're going to write that one yourselves, just like that. Oops, I just want double quote, nothing else in there. Like that. All right, what doesn't it like here? Public class review. Public int review ID. Public string review text. That's correct. Public review string review text. Review text equal review text. Public override. That's exactly what I have on my copy, and for whatever reason, says use primary constructor. All right. Okay. Well, it wanted it done like this. I don't know why. It's not the way I did it before, but hey, it's not giving me any errors. So let's just take a look here. So here. All right. So in here, we're declaring the two variables. I don't know why I'm just going to check real quick. See if I put those on top, if it still takes it. I don't know why it's giving me that, but it is. All right, I'll do it like that. That's fine. It shouldn't hurt anything. All right, so that's 20 points of your program right there. All right, now again, we're going to have to make a change eventually to books to bring in those reviews. And I'm sorry, like I said, I couldn't get it to work. I'll do everything I can to fix that as soon as I possibly can. All right, there's only two more things we have to do. The next thing we want to do is we want to create the context class. Remember that context class is how we're going to have our program. It's how we're going to have our program database can understand, database data translate into something C# can understand. All right. So I'm going to close book.cs and I'm going to close review.cs. All right. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create another class. So right mouse click, add class. You can call this whatever you want, but it's a context class. I'm going to call mine DB context, DB for database, DB context.cs. All right. And this one's going to be written differently than most of the classes that so far. All right. It's a little long. It's not terrible, but we're going to add a little bit of seed data into it. If you say, I don't know what you mean, you will in just a minute. Okay. All right. So we've got everything in here. Again, I'm going to make that public. All right. I've already got just the using system, so I'll leave that there. All right. Now, what I'm showing you next here okay, is we need something other than this. DB context actually is going to inherit from the file. There's a program DB context. Okay, this is ours. This is the system one. It's giving me an error, but if I put my mouse there and click, it says, oh, you want to add your using statement. Boom, there it is. If that confuses you, don't call it DB context. Call yours books context or something like that. It's totally fine. In fact, let's do that because I don't want to confuse people. Let's see if I can come in here and rename this as book context. .cs. And I want to change everything. Yes, there, it changed it to book context and it's changed there. So I should be good with everything. All right. Now, what they showed in the book here was they showed two constructors. I didn't add them. All right. But in mine, but I did put them in. That's what I showed you at the beginning of class. So I'm going to say public, and I've got to give it the name here, which is book context, paren, curly brace, curly brace. If you want, put a comment there and say nowhere constructor. If you don't want to, then don't put it there. All right. Then the other constructor was public, again, book context. It's a little long. Just bear with me for a second. That's it right there. Let me make this a little bigger. All right, hopefully you can see that now. Okay. All right, we're not done yet. We've basically created one NOAR constructor and another constructor that says if we ever decide we're going to add options to this, if we ever decide to do that, that those options are going to be handled by the parent, which is DB context. All right. Okay, when you do this, I mentioned this earlier, we saw this earlier in the chapter. What we have to do in here is we have to create two different methods. All right. They exist in DB context, but we want to override them to make them our own. All right. So the first one is called, in fact, before we even do that, we can set up create DB sets for books and reviews tables. All right, how do we do that? We say public DB set. We'll take a look at what the system's already doing for us. Books get set and public DB set. And in here, review. Whoops, I'm sorry. Reviews. Let me get rid of that. Sorry. Come on, stop it. All right, doesn't like something here. Let's see what it doesn't like. I spelled review wrong. Okay, that's why it was giving me the problems before. See that? Because I'm a moron. All right, let's see if we can change the name here to REVIEW. Hit enter, and yes, we want to change it everywhere. All right, that's probably why earlier that didn't work. All right, when I did all this stuff. Yeah, now look. Now I should be able to come in here and just like we've got right here. All right. Not sure now if we can come in and do this or not. Well, that's the class. So let's see. I'm going to just leave it the way it is. Okay. So file, save all. Sorry for my misspelling. All right. So now we've got review. Now that should work. And we want reviews with a get set. That's setting up our DB set. What that is saying is in just a couple minutes, when we go and try to actually create the database, we want you to take the book class, and based on that book class, we want you to create a table named books. Then based on the review class, we want you to take and create a table named reviews. That's exactly what we're telling it right there. All right. Now are the two different things that we have to override here. Now, this is kind of interesting because these are both protected. We haven't dealt much with protected before. Just protected means that the parent defined it, but we can override it here ourselves. And that's what we're going to do. So it's protected, override, void, and this first one is called on configuring. Now, when you look here, all right, you'll notice it's trying to give you some help here. All right, and I'm going to choose the middle one, on configuring. Okay, but I'm going to get rid of that line that it put in there. Get rid of this line. But I grabbed that from the IntelliSense. If your IntelliSense didn't come up, or if you'd rather type it in yourself or whatever, you can do that. All right. But now what we have to do is we have to give it the information about our database. So you say options builder. That's this right here. Notice it already says, oh, you want to use .SQL server. Yes, we do. And I'm going to put this on multiple lines. And the only reason I'm going to do that is if I tried to put it on one line, you couldn't see all of it. So I'm going to start it right here. And I'm going to say @ double quote, data source, 2 words, equals, we've done this before, inside of parens, local DB, then a forward or a slash, MSSQL local DB. That has just defined for us the server. That says we're using our machine as our data source or as our server. That's what's going to house the database that we're about to create. What database? Well, we want to come in here and say initial catalog, 2 words, equals, and now we put in the name of our database, and we don't need a .mdf on the end. All right. Now, I'm going to quickly check something in here. Give me a second, because I want to make sure I don't try to override something that's here. So let me go to View, SQL Server, Object Explorer. Okay. I'm going to call mine Books Final. If you don't like that name, come up with your own. So Books Final, just like that. And finally, the other thing I'm going to say in here is that thing that we had been saying, which is integrated security equal true. And it did run off the page, so let me do this. There you go. And literally, that's all we need to put in to this particular method. All right, we've got one more method to write, and then we're going to see if we can convert this thing into a database. All right. So again, @ and everything within double quotes, the data source is our server. That means we're using the local machine. We are going to attempt to build a database in a minute that's called Books Final. All right. And we want to turn on the security that we get. I don't think I spelled anything wrong. Data source, local, MS. Notice there's 2 L's in here. It's MSSQL, then local DB. I believe this is all case insensitive, but that's the way I put it in. Initial catalog equal, it'll be called books final, integrated security equal true. All right, that's everything in our configuration. All right, now we're going to write one more method, not a lot, maybe 20 lines or so. All right, but that's the end of this one. If this is the end of the on configure right here. We're still inside of this right here. All right. But after our on configure, we have to go and do another protected override. And this one is on model creating. So it's the bottom one. Okay. And again, we don't want that line that's in here. So I used the IntelliSense again. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add seed data, but just add it to the book table. So we're going to have two books in here. I made these up. They're actually titles, but I made up the ISBN. I made up there's no image, and I made up the publish year. You can eventually remove these two if you want to do so. You can also come in, and once you create your own data, you can put that in here and remove the data that's in here. So there's a lot of ways that you can play with this, is what I'm telling you. All right. So what we want to do, notice in here we used options builder. Now we want to use model builder. So it's model builder dot entity. What entity? It's our book entity. And we want to say that it has data. I'm going to put in a left paren, and my right paren I'm going to put down below with a semicolon at the end. It's giving me an error because we haven't put anything in here yet. As soon as we start to fill this in, all right, and like I said, there's about 10 more lines to type, or so 10 or 12, whatever it is. That'll go away, or at least it should go away. All right, so we have to tell it what we want. We want to create a new book here. All right, we put that within curly braces. Notice that error has already gone away. All right, but we have to tell it everything. Now, this is the one time when you create seed data like this, you must provide a value for the ID. It's not being auto-incremented. We're hard coding this in. So ID equals 1. ISBN equals, and that's a string, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And each one of these has a comma between them except the last one. Author name equals John Steinbeck. Book name equals Of Mice and Men. Publisher, publish year is equal to, and I made this up, I don't know when it was. I said 2000, and that is not a string, and that's why it's not in double quotes. And image, I don't have one. So you'll have to go out and get an image for that yourselves, is what I'm saying. All right, get rid of that. Now we're not done. We're going to make another one just like this in just a second. All right. So we're saying we want two records. The first one will have an ID of 1. That'll be the ISBN right here. That'll be the author name right here. That'll be the book name right here. That'll be the published name right here. And we don't have an image right now. So you will have to eventually create in here, under your project, you'll want to add a new folder that is called images. And you'll want to put your images in there. All right. So I'm going to copy this and then just modify it. Now, what you have to do is you have to put a comma, and then we can put in our next one. All right, let me move that over. Formatting got screwed up. All right, so this will be book ID 2. And I'll change the ISBN to 234567891. The author name here, I made Rudyard Kipling. And the date, I put 2010. And for some reason, I left that as Of Mice and Men. So let me find a book from Kipling. I can't ask you to use real data if I'm not going to use it myself. So books by Rudyard Kipling. There's a nice one. Kim. That's a nice short one. Kim. All right. And good news is that's it. So we came into here. We created 2 constructors. I didn't have to. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. They showed it in the book. So for completeness sake, I put them in. We created a DB set, which said we're going to have 2 tables in here. One called books based off of the book class. One called reviews based off of the review class. All right. Then we gave our configuration information. We told the system where our server was, our machine, what the database is to be called, books final. All right. And the fact that it should have the built-in Windows security. All right. This could have all been put into one line. If you're more comfortable, would rather do that, do that. Then we also overrode the on model creating. And here I can put in a comment. I didn't have to, but I'm going to put in here, add seed data to books table. So when we create this in just a moment, the reviews table should be empty because we didn't add any data to it. The books data should have 2 records in it. Now that should make sense to everyone. And I said here, I want this to be called books final. And what I did was I went over to my SQL Server Object Explorer here, and I wanted to make sure I didn't have something called books final. Notice I've got a books DB, a books test, a bookstore, etc. But I have nothing called books final. All right. Now is the time that we see whether or not this all works, or if I screwed something up, or if you screwed something up. So I'm going to do a file save all first. All right. It's a good thing to do first to just run this. If it works, all it's going to do is show me my empty form. But if it works, I didn't have any compile time errors. So I'm going to try to run it. And it came up. So I have no compile time errors. That's good. The reason I'm telling you that is with what we're about to do is we're going to bring up the package manager console. If you have any compile time errors and you try to run the 2 commands we're going to put in, it will immediately come back and it will say build failed. And if that's the case, get out of the package manager console and go back and build the program. And if you have errors, fix the errors first. But what we can do now, if you look in here, I have a book class, a book context class, my form, the program.cs, which is that system file, and my review class. I think everybody'd agree. That's all that's in here. Hopefully in just a minute, we're going to have more in here. So go to Tools, then go to NuGet Package Manager and choose the option on top that says Package Manager Console. And that should open it up down here. There is my Package Manager Console. I have to run 2 different commands. I'm going to bring this way the heck up. You don't have to do this. But I want you case insensitive. You must spell them correctly. There's going to be a couple words here and you must hyphenate. The first one you put in here, you want to add a database, but you don't type in add database. You type in add migration. Don't hit enter. because you've got to give it a name. Most people call their first migration initial setup. Don't put a space between those words. So add hyphen migration. It looks like I spelled it right. Initial setup. Then hit enter. It says it started and it succeeded. Good. You say, well, big deal. It's a real big deal because it made a folder here called migrations. And it has two files in it. One that's called initial setup, which is this one. We just called it right here. And the other one is called snapshot. And that snapshot is supposed to basically keep track of everything we've done. Now, this is the file that we just created right here. And I want to show it to you. Basically, what the system did was it took our stuff and it made it databaseable, which I know isn't a word, I get it. But it says, we're going to run an update command in just a minute. It says, when you run that, we want to create a new database. Here's the first table. It's called books. It has a book ID that's int, that's nullable false. That's an identity column, 1-1. It's got an X. All right, so I guess it will allow for Unicode. That's fine. It doesn't matter. We're not going to use Unicode anyway. All right, and then make sure that the primary key is set. Then do the same kind of thing for reviews. Then when you get done with that, add the data. All right. And those are our two records, the ones you just saw. Now, to run this, and don't type it in and hit enter yet. All right. But we're just going to type in one more command, and that is update space database. And that should create our database for us. But just so you know, there is also a down command in here. What that down command will do is it drops everything. So if you screwed it up, actually the easiest way is if you screw it up, what I usually do is that, let's just say this first one doesn't work. Let's say I screwed it up. I'll remove my whole migrations folder. I'll go back and do another. Once I fix it, I'll do another add space migration initial setup, then an update database. Now, I want to show you this one should be a little bit longer, but after the update database, hit enter, started, it succeeded, and it says it's done. Okay, so that was everything. All right, now I'm going to close the package manager. I'm going to close this. I'm going to make this much, much smaller. I'm going to go back and I'm going to do a view and go to my SQL Server Object Explorer, and I'm going to refresh right there. And now I'm hoping against hope that I have in here, I have a new database, and that new database is called so let's look under databases, books vinyl. There it is. If I open that up and go to tables, it has two tables in it, books and reviews. If I go to books and I right mouse click on it and say view data, there's my two records. John Steinbeck of Mice and Men and Rudyard Kipling, Kim. All right. Now, if you try doing this and you're sure you did it correctly, but something is hosed and you don't know what it is, you will have to email me. If I bring up, just so you see this, all right, I can now go back in here and I can also look at this, right mouse click on it, and I can view the designer. And this is what it's set up for me. This is what it's set up for me here, and this is what it's set up for me here. Now, I could change these if I wanted to, to not null or whatever. I'm going to leave everything the way it came in. And I can, if I view the data, it's empty. We didn't put any reviews in. But if I go to the data here and I say view designer, it shows how that was set up. All right. So hopefully yours went off without a hitch. If it did not, if it did not, email me. One thing we can't do is I can't give you my database. You can't give me your database. That, but I've never had it work with a student before. All right. We've always had to just fix it another way. All right. Now, this is what I'd recommend. All right. My belief is that there's two of you watching right now live. And to my knowledge, the two of you watching right now live are all caught up on everything. Great. I honestly, I'm very proud of you. And I'm not being facetious or anything else. What I'd suggest you start to do is see if you can build this form. All right. Then you're going to have to take a look at the section near the end of the chapter. All right. Where it showed how you can fill this, and you can fill a drop down using a link expression. See if you can do that. All right. And then just see what you can or cannot do here. See if you can try to implement paging. You should also be able to put in this one. Okay. If you have problems with those, let me know. All right. Now I'm going to go back on mine. I'm going to look at what I did here. If I think for some reason this was too difficult, then I might show you some of the stuff I did in mine. I don't want to show you too much. This is a final project. All right. And hopefully, like I said, hopefully I've done a decent enough job of explaining it that either yours worked and you're right where I am right now, or yours didn't work, but you'll be able to email me and tell me why. All right. One last thing I want to say, it's a repeat, but I want to say it anyway. Again, I attached to your email today a zipped folder that has that program for chapter 20 in it. So if you get a little bit stuck, you can look at that and it might help you. All right. I also attached for you the two programs for extra exercises using Entity Framework Core and adding a data access, which we don't even have to do in ours. All right. Finally, at the end of our chapter, I mean, this is what I'd do if I were you. Okay. Now you might listen to yeah and say, yeah, blow it out of your butt or whatever. But I would go back and look at that program that's here. That one, the customer and maintenance one. It's about the last 10 pages or so of the chapter. Starts on 664 and it goes to 676. All right. Then I would go in and look and see if you can do this project. I've given you the final project. It's all, you also have that already, but see if you can do this. All right. Review the code and run the app. Some of it will work, some of it won't. Add EF core. This is create your own app.config file. If you want to do that, you can. If you create your own app.config file, then where I put it in the onConfigure method in our DB context, you'll have to update it as they show in figure 27. All right. Then they show you how to retrieve a product, like a select, how to modify, which is an update, how to add, which is an insert. All right. And I know that in here. All right. That's the way I would do it. Now, again, if you decide not to, then you decide not to. All right. Okay. Starting tomorrow, everything will be lab. Two more things, and I promise I'm done. Number one, not if, but when I figure out how to incorporate the review class into the book class. After I do that, I'll be adding some stuff here. Then what I'll do is I will again bring up the package manager console and I will do another add migration, but you've got to give it a different name. So I'll put something like added review capability to books class, to book class, something like that. I'm not going to hit enter. All right, but I'll do something like that. Then if it works, I will come in and do another update database. If it works, it will add another migration file here. All right. And then I'll do another update database. I'll come back into my SQL Server Object Explorer. I will refresh. And once I do that, I should be able to look then at my books final. All right. Yeah, it's things I'm still editing, and that's why it's goofing up right now. Okay. All right. But if I close all these, I don't know if that'll fix it or not, but let's close all tabs. There. Now I should be able to bring that up in here. There we go. All right. So hopefully you've got an idea of at least how to start. All right. It'll be something to see. Consider this a win if you're able to fill this up and fill it up using a where clause or however you're told to do it in your instructions. All right. With each of the three authors. Okay. And from the great start. All right. Last time then, that's the one thing. And the other thing, I've already mentioned that if I come up with something like some kind of an idea on how to fix this, I'll do either a mini lecture or something showing you exactly what I did. All right. And then finally, I thought I put it in here, but I guess I didn't. I am going to attempt to do by the end of the weekend kind of a preview lecture. Those of you who will be in the AWD 1115 class, I'm going to create a fairly simple .NET program that's going to look a lot very similar to what we're doing right now. All right. For those of you who will be in the AWD 1000 class this summer, the Web Development Technologies, I think it's called, I'm going to create a simple website for you. Both of you preview and the AWD 1000 preview, I will save both of those as a GitHub repo. I'm going to do a presentation on each. I'm going to do it myself. All right. Sorry, dropped my internet connection. So I will give you the URLs to both of those, and I will give you the URLs to the associated GitHub repositories. That's all I've got. All right. Good luck. And, again, you'll be hearing from me again, but there's no scheduled lectures left for the rest of the chapter. But please, please, please feel free to email me if I can be of any help. All right. With that, have a good rest of the semester. Good luck to you on the project. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.